Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure for us in another episode of the Tennis Talk Coaches' Voices, where the leaders and the coaches have a voice to talk about what it means to be a high-performing person. Is to have a great guest, a great tennis leader with us, Brian Gottfried. Hi, Brian.
Fernando, how are you today?
Thank you very much to be with us in the new episode of the Tennis Talk. To introduce Brian, but many people knows him. Brian was former number 3 in the world in singles. He won 25 titles. He has the average of more than 700 matches, which he won on the professional tour. He was number 2 in doubles, also winning 54 titles, 3 Grand Slams, Roland Garros twice, and also Wimbledon in 1978. He was in the final of singles of the US Open and doubles in the US Open, and also in Roland Garros in singles. Also, he was president of the ATP, and he was cooperating in many different areas of the ATP and different committees. He's a true leader of our sport. And again, thank you to be with us in our episode.
My pleasure. Thanks. It's a great pleasure to be here, and good to see you again from our last visit in Houston a couple of months ago.
Yeah, it was a very good time to share with you in Houston. Let me ask you the first question, which is very important that people can know. Who is Brian Gottfried?
Oh, you start with a tough one. I'm still trying to learn that person after 70 years, but I was. How do I start? I guess it'd be best in front of a tennis crowd to maybe start with my tennis career. Mm-hmm. And I started when I was 8 years old. We kept some players at our house. We were living in Miami at the time. We kept some players at our house for the Orange Bowl. They left me a racket. These players were from Japan, and I used to go watch them every day. They left me a racket. And between that, God planted a passion in my heart for tennis, mm-hmm. and it hasn't changed. So that's probably where most of your audience probably knows me from a tennis standpoint. But I would say apart from that, my dad was a semi-pro baseball player, so mm-hmm. I had good athletic genes running in the family. My family is very important to me. God is very important. So I would say I would be your normal person walking down the street with just a talent that God gave me years ago that I've been able to pursue and use. And that's one thing that I think is important when you receive a talent. Yeah. Do you use it to its fullest? And whether I used it to its fullest, I don't know. Somebody else will be the judge of that. But it was something that kept me going, kept my interest, just was all a part of my life. I mean, when I started playing in 1960, so that was a few hundred years ago. If you remember, open tennis didn't start till 1968, so you could have a passion of something mm-hmm. and not have anywhere to go with it. Well, that would have been the case. But in 68, when open tennis started, there was then an avenue for me to use that talent and create a career. And I've still been involved ever since.
Yeah, a great career, great journey you did, Brian. Also, you are a very proud dad and grandfather, no?
Yes, lots of kids. We have 7 children, 17 grandkids. So they keep us very busy. In fact, we have one sleeping in the back right now. So we're usually doing something with them around these times of the year. But also I'm still involved in tennis in a lot smaller way, but I'm still very focused on it, very interested in it. Everything from, junior tennis onto the pro scene. And when the majors come up during the year, we spend a lot of time watching them on TV. Some years we get back to them. So there's still that passion and that interest in all phases of the game.
Yeah, it's our field, no? And our passion for the game. Let me ask you, Brian, how was that transformation, coming from to be a top player and then to be a coach and to be a leader, helping others? How was your process?
Well, I was able to play on the tour for 13 years. Mm-hmm. So, but then all of a sudden the competitive desire left. I was still in the top 50 in the world, and I just didn't have the feeling to compete. I always loved the game, and I didn't lose the love of the game. Mm-hmm. But to get myself ready to compete was something that I lost. And I'm very single focused. So if I can't do something the way I want to do it, I think it can't be done. Well, maybe I jumped the gun a little bit too quick. Maybe there were ways to do it. I know lots of players that nowadays they change their training habits a little bit. They maybe focus on doubles a little bit more. You know, mm-hmm. In our day, we played single doubles, as you remember.
Yeah.
I knew to get myself ready, I had to do it in one way only. So I couldn't do it that way. I said, okay, it must be time to leave. That was in 1984. But before I left, I knew I wanted to get involved in coaching. I always said during my playing years, I don't want to teach tennis. I want to play, and that's the end of it. But the last couple of months of my playing career, I developed an interest in coaching high performance young players. Mm-hmm. So I was able to spend the last couple of months sort of preparing for that, making notes, what I wanted to do, how I wanted to do things. And that I think was really helpful. What was also helpful, which was a blessing that I didn't know about, was I hurt my shoulder at the end of the last couple of months of my playing career. Mm-hmm. So it sort of forced me to slow down and focus on this coaching side. So I think some things were working in the background that kind of was preparing me to move on. And then when I stopped playing, I was able to work with some pro players mm-hmm. Immediately. And I thought my impact with them would be greatest having just left the tour, because I would have played against these players that they were competing against. So I would have firsthand knowledge on strategy and things that they needed to do when going out on the court. So I thought that was a good time for me to stay on the pro tour for a while. I did that for about 5 years. And then I felt that on the tour, you're sort of limited in what you can do. And you can't get involved because the players are older and they're more established. Yeah. So I wanted to get more involved with younger players. So I made a decision to start working more with junior players. And if some pros wanted to work with me, that was fine. But I wouldn't travel and make a concerted effort to really spend time on the tour. My interest then went back to the juniors, and that was about in the 90s. At that time, the USTA was creating a junior development program. That was mm-hmm. it was probably in 1988. So I became a coach for the USTA. And at the same time, the ATP was looking to move and build a permanent home and tennis club, mm-hmm. which I was then later asked to be the director for. That was in Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida. So I did that along with coaching for the USTA for a few years. I worked with players like Mike Chang, Mal Washington, Todd Martin. And then, like I said, I ran the tennis club for the ATP back in the early 90s. So I feel I was very fortunate to go from a full 13 years on the tour, and then to immediately start a coaching administrative role with the ATP. So I was fortunate enough to catch right on with that.
Yeah, it was very good journey. Let me ask you, Brian, how was in terms, because you were a great tennis player, how was your transformation to reach your best version? How was the process because you are a high performing person. We used to call high performing person a person which maximize the potential to reach the best place. You were the top 5 players in the world in your those times. How was that process?
Well, thank you for
no
a
numbers talk.
Well, I like to think I'm still a work in progress. I'm not there yet, but I do try to work on myself as well as my skills, the talents I've been given. It's an ongoing process, and you know, for me, it's one where I continually listen and learn, both from God and the people that are around me, whether they be fellow coaches, whether they be players I've coached. You're constantly listening and growing. And I've listened to the interviews you've done the last couple of days with Liam Smith and Frederick Fontang, and they say very similar things. And I think that might be something that carries over when you see a lot of coaches, when you hear from a lot of coaches, that you've got to keep your ears open. And for me, it's a constant, it's tweaking what you know. I think over the years, for me, I started with a philosophy. I shouldn't say I started with it. I developed a philosophy, coaching, living philosophy. And that's constantly being tweaked. It's being changed. When I hear you speak at a convention, or when I hear a fellow coach, you know, there might be similar concepts, but there might be different ways to say things, or different points you're trying to get across. So I try to listen to those and try to learn from those. And I think that's having a philosophy, I think is really, really important, because it guides everything else you do. From the coaching side, it certainly, you build on that with the players you're coaching. Those are the important building stones, building blocks that you use to help develop that young player, let's say. So I think that's important. It also helps when you're planning a daily schedule for that young player. Okay, I believe in this, so therefore my drills and the daily practice should be this way. Certainly you have your beliefs in how it should go. Then you look at the player and how they are developing, what their goals are, and you try to mesh the two of them together. So I think that's an important part of it for me, to create that philosophy. And again, it's changing, not major changes, but it's being tweaked regularly.
Yeah, it's part of your own evolution, no? It's part of the process, like you say. Talking about the philosophy of your coaching principles, which are the most important that you can describe in terms of how you work with players, and then how you understand the game, which are important to share with different coaches, which are part of our audience?
Some of the things that I like to focus on with players is, before I ever meet a player, before I ever work with a player, I like to spend time with him or her. But I also like for who's ever in charge of that player, whether it be a parent or another coach or a mentor, them to meet me. And I want them to know what makes me tick and the things that are important to me. And I want to know what things are important to that player, because I think you've got to have a good understanding of those things to have a successful coaching career. I don't necessarily buy into the fact that there's the best coach in tennis or the worst coach. It's all dependent on the relationship between the coach and the player. So you can have a coach that's coached many top players in the world, but for one player they don't have a relationship with, so it's harder for them to connect. So they won't be as successful with that other player. So I like to make sure there's a connection between myself and the player that I coach. They understand me, and I understand them. You also, you might think you're coaching a tennis player, but you're really, again, in my case, I'm working mostly with juniors. You're really growing, helping a person grow up,
yeah,
a person develop. You're a mentor for that player. I can remember as a young player, even before I played tennis in other sports, I spent most of the time with my parents, but the second most time of any day was spent with the coach.
mm-hmm.
So I got a lot out of those coaches just on a daily basis and a human developmental basis. So it's really important that relationship works. So let's say you take the best situation. If you coach a young player, mm-hmm. and you start with him when he's, in his teens, and he becomes the best player everything works, and he becomes the best player in the world, that's going to happen late 20s, early 30s. He still has another 50, 60, 70 years of life after that. So he needs to have developed those life skills. So when he's finished playing the best career, even when he's finished, that he can develop and he can move on in life. So that's an important part of my philosophy. Developing life skills as we're playing, as we're learning the game. What does that mean? That means it might be simple things. It might be showing up on time for practice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Keeping your commitments, keeping your word, respecting your opponent, respecting the game, respecting the officials, the facilities. A lot of old school philosophies, but instead of somebody said, "Whoa, he's an old coach," Well, let's say, I would like to say it a little bit differently. I would like to say those are time-tested philosophies rather than their old philosophies. So I think they're going to help you in all parts of life. So those are the types of things. As far as tennis goes, the things that are important for me on a tennis court is that a player develops a plan B out on the court. He not only has his strength and his weakness, but he has a second phase of his game that he can go to if things aren't working for him. So that's an important part of the things I develop. Plan B. Back in the olden days when we played singles and doubles, I like for the players to learn how to play doubles, because I think you see a different part of the game on a doubles court that you don't always see it in a singles court. It helps you grow as a player, helps you learn teamwork, and it also helps your overall game. Plus, you're learning a skill. I mean, if you're not, again, I look back on my career. If I lost early in a tournament, but was still in the doubles, I was still winning matches, gaining confidence, and that was helpful in my overall growth and development. So those are a couple things.
Very interesting.
I like to also I like to coach a player for long-term success rather than short-term results. Mm-hmm. I want the player to become as good as they can become. Not if they win the 12 and under state tournament, great, because competing is also a part. I want them to learn how to compete, but I'm not going to have them develop a game that wins at 12 and can't go on from there. So that's an important part of my coaching philosophy. So those are just a couple of ideas and a couple of thoughts that I have.
Very, very good ones to share with all our audience, coaches, tennis people, and young player for sure that is watching our episode. Brian, you were a top player in the moment that you competed against guys like Connors, Borg, McEnroe, Solomon, many good players around. And also you are following, you respect a lot the history of the game. You did talk about it. And also you are watching the new generations and the actual generation, the Nadals, the Djokovic, the Federers, the Sampras, and the past, the Agassi. What do you think is a key concept, a principle, how champions think, how champions behave? Which kind of a very particular aspect they are in common?
Good question. I think if somebody could bottle that, they could make a lot of money with and sell it. I think lots of players have a passion to succeed, a passion to improve, a passion to stay on enjoy the process rather than just the results. Of course, results are going to come, but there's a fine line between there. I like to differentiate the playing part, and I like to call it competing.
Yep.
I want players to learn how to compete, not necessarily play and win. So they have to learn how to compete, which means learning how to lose too.
Yep.
And that's an important part. It might sound funny, but it's an important part. You've got to be able to take something from a loss. At Wimbledon, there was one winner and 127 losers in the men's side.
Yeah.
Same as women's. But you can't look at it that way. If you had your best result, if you had a win, if you beat a player that you had never beaten before, if you played your best tennis on grass that you've ever played before, if you got to the second week of a major that you had not done before, there's always things that you've got to take from your matches. There's always positive that you've got to take out of each tournament. Obviously, you've got to learn why you lost. You've got to know why you lost the match so you can get better. So there's got to be learning how to compete side of it. But I think a big part of what the great players like, what the great players do so well, is they enjoy the process, and every day they wake up saying, how do I get better? Not how do I make more money or how do I win 22 Grand Slams? Everybody knows the numbers. Those guys know that they're charting their path in history. They don't have to be reminded. Yeah. But for me, it's so great to see. I saw Nadal when he first came to Wimbledon, when he was about, I don't remember the year, when he was about 16 or 17, and I saw him play, and he stood way far behind the baseline and played every ground stroke cross court with heavy topspin and did it very well. But to see his game change from then to what it is now, to where he's serving and volleying when he has to, and he's playing more forehands down the line, and he's able to come in, and he's able to use the slice backhand. That's all improvement since he's been on the tour, which is very, very difficult to do when you're on the tour. So that tells me, or to see Djokovic serving and volleying occasionally. He couldn't do that years ago. That's all, to me, that's great to see that. And it sort of points to me that these guys are looking to get better every day they're playing. And I think that to me is one of the most critical things that young players, and that maybe if there's one thing I would try to stamp in a young player's mind, it would be enjoy the process. How do you get better each day?
Very, very good. And then when coming back, talking about your response, when you were a player, a young player, let's say in the 60s and 70s, did you take something about Pancho Gonzalez or some key players from the United States? Did you look those players, the stars of those times, to pick up some concepts? Let's say you copy or not copy, but learn about it?
More than that, you hit it. You said it right. Copy. We used to watch. There wasn't that much tennis on TV, but the times that we did see it, I would watch them and go out and try to mimic whatever they did. I can remember. I can remember watching. Do you remember Chuck McKinley when he won Wimbledon?
Yeah.
So Chuck had a habit when he got mad. He had this Australian floppy hat on. He took the hat off his head and he hit it with his racket into the ground. So I practiced that too.
Very good.
Yeah, watching players serve, watching their technique on their serve, and so that was a big part of it. And you mentioned the name Pancho Gonzalez. After probably 4 or 5 years on the tour, Harold Solomon and I went to see Pancho, and spent a week in Las Vegas with him, trying to just get into his head and learn as much as we could. So yes, those guys were a big part of our life. I mean, as we were growing up, 15 and 16-year-olds, we went to California to compete back in those days in what they had a Junior Davis Cup team tryout. Mm-hmm. Selected the top 5 or 6 Americans to travel all summer together. Part of that training was that we would play 2 sets with Barry McKay, mm-hmm. who was on the pro tour. So, those guys, are you kidding me? That was like, I don't know, that was like a steak dinner at Ruth's Chris, being able to play against Barry. And then certainly meeting players like Arthur Ashe, Stan Smith, Roy Emerson, Rod Laver, Tony Roach, John Newcomb, Rafael Osuna from Mexico. Just all those players, being able to meet them for the first time, it was like, I think my jaw was hanging down to the ground in awe the first time. I remember the first time arriving in Paris in 1972 to play Roland Garros. And this year they had a Davis Cup match scheduled the week before Paris, mm-hmm. between Spain and France. So we arrived in Paris a few days early to practice and walk out on the center court. And there's Andres Gimeno and Pierre Barthez playing a Davis Cup match. Are you kidding me? It's like I died and went to heaven. I'm walking through World Tennis Magazine, by seeing something. So those guys were a huge part of my life growing up. And I think, if we go back, I can remember driving to junior tournaments, and there was one tennis magazine back in those days called World Tennis. Yeah, we would read World Tennis. We would play tennis initials. You give the initials of the player and try to guess it. There weren't video games and, apps that you stream on your phone and things like that. That was it. You talked tennis, you ate tennis, you read about tennis. That was a big part of our life.
Yeah. And we learn through war tennis. We learn those times we don't have anything that we have right now. Talking about communication, because you did talk about the Mexican Osuna, but also you had a lot of great results with another star from Mexico, Robert Ramirez. And I'm talking about communication. How was the communication process with your partner? You were a great doubles player. Also, you won Grand Slams, a lot of tournaments, some of them with Raul. How was the communication process? How you create a great team winning tournaments?
Well, I think that was a major, major part of what we did, because we communicated well. And we did it verbally. We actually tried, many players do it with hand signals and things like that nowadays. We actually tried that for a little bit of time. Mm-hmm. And we could not do it. We couldn't communicate with hand signals. We had to talk after each point to talk about what we were going to do. So it was a big part of what we did. It was, and you spend a lot of time with your doubles partner, or we did back then. We traveled together. We set our same schedules together. Excuse me.
Yeah.
We would set our schedules similarly so we could play together. We would warm each other up. Like I said, we traveled together from tournament to tournament. So we spent a lot of time with each other. So the communication, we ate together after matches. So it was important. We played together for 8 years, Raul and I. And then we had some difficulties communicating, and our priorities changed. So we went through a time where we took some time away from each other, mm-hmm. but we then went back and we played together after that also. So to me, like I said, we played for 8 years together, and I know there were many teams that played for a lot longer than we did. Stan Smith, Bob Lutz, Bob Hewitt, Fru McMillan, John Newcomb, Tony Roach, the list goes on. To me, that was an important part of it. And looking at players nowadays, I'm shocked to see how often players change doubles partners. Obviously, they're great doubles players. And I think when you know the doubles game, you can play with other players. You can play with other doubles players. But when you find a good partnership, to me, why break it up? So I'm interested. I'd be interested to talk. I haven't talked to many of the guys that play doubles nowadays, why they change, how often they change, and what their focus is when they look for another one. But it just shocks me that to see that many changes in the doubles events these days.
Yep. And how you manage pressure. Pressure is part of the game, but how you manage when you play it singles, and also how you did it in doubles, playing with Raul.
I think it's easier in doubles because you have somebody there with you. Mm-hmm. So I've always found it easier in doubles to manage pressure. It's a big part of the game, and it's a big part of coaching, because it's probably the question most coaches are asked the most from younger players or players' parents, how you handle pressure. I think it's something it doesn't ever go away, and it doesn't ever get less. The butterflies don't ever get less. You still get nervous. If I'm asked to play an exhibition here where I live in Sarasota, Florida, locally, mm-hmm. I feel nervous going out on the court. You want to perform well. I think that's just normal.
Yeah.
Well, at 70 years old is a whole lot different than well at 25. So there's a little bit of difference, but you still want to perform as well as you can. So I think, there are things some little tricks you use. Certainly if you're playing at Wimbledon, let's say the biggest stage in the world, on the most famous court, that was always difficult for me. Even after doing it many times, there's still something about the center court at Wimbledon that's totally different from any other place. Yeah. And I got more nervous playing there. But the things you can do, you try not to focus on the big picture. You try to focus on something smaller. When I would be out on the court, I'd be focused on something very simple, watching the ball. I can't tell you how many times I would tell myself to watch the ball. Even as a pro, you maybe wouldn't think that you'd have to say that many times.
Yep.
If you could bring that big focus back into something very small, I think it can be very helpful. Some players would tell themselves, move their feet. So I think there are some little tricks like that you use, bringing the focus into a smaller context. It's also something you grow into. You don't start by playing in front of 15,000 people. Mm-hmm. You start by playing in front of nobody, and then your parents, and then maybe your brothers and sisters come, and then maybe some friends are watching. So you're taking steps along the way to play in front of more and more people. So you get more and more acclimated to that. So I think that's sort of the development of a competitive player.
Yeah, and then when you play, let's say, the finals of Grand Slam, you won many of them. You prepare the play. You design the moment. You work with Raul to have, let's say, or your partner, a certain type of play, or you decided in the moment, depending the opponent, the situation. How was for you?
Yeah, I think I always like to have a game plan. My game style was one that didn't have a particular strength, mm-hmm. but it had a consistency to it. So I could do everything reasonably well. Mm-hmm. So I needed to really have a plan. I lost a lot of first sets of matches, but I won a lot of 3-set matches in my career, because it took me a little while to if I didn't have a plan going in, to create that plan while I'm playing. But if I knew the player, I always like to have a plan. I have a little black book that I've been writing in for 50 years about every player that I've ever played. And after I play him, I put the notes in of that player. So the next time I play him, I've got an idea of what they play like and what I'm going to do. So I like to have a game plan going out on the court. Having said that, that's not always possible. So you've got to be able to adjust. And I think that's part of the growth process is as a pro, when you're successful. Maybe you've got a good game plan, but you got a net court against you on break point. So you lost a set, but the plan was right. So you have a feeling for those types of things. I think that's part of the experience, part of being a professional, that you get a sense of when the game plan isn't right and you've got to make a change. And then other times when it is right and there was just some bad luck involved. Having said all that, there were many times going out on the court where the game plan wasn't right. A lot of times playing a guy like Borg on clay, or I played Guillermo Vilas in the finals of the French Open in 1977. Mm-hmm. And my game was built around attacking. My game is built around attacking, and his is built around consistency, playing from the baseline, passing shots. Nothing was working that day. So I had to just keep going, and it ended up being not a very good day for me. But you learn from that. We played probably 6 or 7 times that year, Vilas and I won a couple and he won most. But depending on the surface, depending on the conditions, some days it works, some days it doesn't. You just have to keep moving forward. And what's also important when you're playing multiple tournaments in a row, you learn from the tournament. You take 24 hours to sort of digest what happened.
Yeah.
And then you've got to move on because you've got the first round of a new tournament, usually absolutely. 2 days later.
Absolutely. But your game plan and showing a lot of consistency, because you did play more than 1,000 matches and you won more than 700, which means 70% of the matches that you played, you won, which is a very good number in terms of be competitive, no?
Well, yeah. I mean, what's interesting is that while you're going through it, you're not thinking of those numbers. You're thinking about winning the next match.
Yeah.
And if you didn't win that match, you're thinking about getting ready for the next tournament and getting ready for that next match. So, looking back, you mentioned that winning 1,000 matches, singles and doubles combined, that excites me to hear that number because I don't focus on it a lot. But if you look back, you say, oh, things were going okay most days,
Yeah.
So that was always nice. It's nice to have had success like that. I also, what I loved about the years on the tour, on the professional tour, and actually back to the juniors too, is that those players that I battled with in those 1,000 matches are today my closest friends, our fiercest rivals, or our closest friends. Very good. So, that's a big part of it. I call and I speak with some of them throughout the year. We'll just call just to say hello, or we might see a player. We watched the finals of Wimbledon and saw when they flashed up to the Royal Box, I saw Stan and Margie Smith sitting in the Royal Box. So I would text Stan and saying, "Your wife looks good. What happened?" Some text just to touch base with them and just say hello. But those are my lifelong friends. So that's been a major part of what we've been through and developed also.
Yeah. This is our passion and the love of the game, no? We spend all our life. Let me change a little bit, and the perspective that the things that we are talking about. How was your time in charge of the ATP? How was because you were a leader working for our game and on the main organization. How was that time?
It was a great learning experience. I had never run a tennis club until that time. I had been involved with clubs mostly as a tour because I was playing. So I was what they call the touring pro. Mm-hmm. I would do some promotional work for clubs, which I had done before, but this is my first chance to run a tennis club. And so that was a great learning experience, but also it was interesting because the ATP was like no other tennis club. We not only ran the club for our members, but we made available training opportunities for pros on the tour. Mm-hmm. So any pro that was a member of the ATP could come in and spend time at the club, and I would work with them. So it was, and that's unusual. As you know, running tennis clubs, you sort of lose contact with the pro game. So, so that was a part of it. Another part of it was being at the ATP administrative headquarters, the international headquarters. Mm-hmm. I was always aware of what was going on the tour, rule changes, players that were playing well, ranking system updates. So I was still heavily involved in pro tennis. Started back then, what's now called the ATP University. Now I think, so it's an educational process for the young players. They have to attend this couple-day course within two years of being on the tour. So in those days, before DVDs and digital media, they had to come to Ponte Vedra. So we created the first university, and we did it with a paper and a pencil, and people make live speeches. The players had to be there. So we got to interact, and we got to learn. In fact, that's where that the speech that I gave in Houston, History of the Game, that's where that had its beginning at the ATP University in 1990.
That's very good.
So, there was, so that was, to be involved in the ATP was a great experience. Still kept me involved in pro tennis, meeting people and doing new things that I had never done. So it was a great experience for me.
Yeah, we know that we can speak by hours. Let's do a couple more questions. What do you think about the new coaching role in the ATP that allow coaches to talk a little bit in one box on the side? What do you think about it?
I knew you were going to ask about that, and I'm not sure what I think about it yet. It would be easy to say I'm an old school player. I think players should be able to figure it out for themselves on court. But I'm not sure I believe that. What I do believe is that players should be independent. Yep. And walking and start taking your focus elsewhere besides keeping it right on the court on your opponent, it can be distracting. So I'd be interested to hear or to see how, after it's been going a year, how many players are actually looking for that type of thing. Because I know sometimes when players look up into their box or when they speak to their box, it's more to relieve pressure. And I can relate to that. But to have a long conversation with a coach at a time that when you need to keep your focus out on the court can be distracting. And when I say that, keep your attention out on the court, there are things that you go through as a competitor that you're aware of. And for example, you can tell when your opponent's getting tight. Okay, they'll start to speed up. They won't bounce the ball as many times on the serve.
Yeah,
their toss on their serve might go off. They'll start to play more backhands safer. So there are things you can pick up on, but you need to be in tune to those things. Certainly when an opponent cramps, you can pick up on that when they're getting tired. Yeah. So those are the types of things you need to be aware of. So I've always tried to instill in the players that I coach independence. I don't even want you knowing where I'm sitting in the stands. Mm-hmm. You've got to be that in tune with what's going on out on the court. So I think I just need to wait and see how it works, the coaching side, for a year, and see how much it's used as to how successful it is.
Yeah, for sure. Let me ask you, Brian, because you spend a lot of time in tennis, passing through different generations, also big coaches. Which kind of recommendations you can say for tennis coaches? Which are the main values to say that it's a principle for every coach all over the world?
Again, I have my philosophy and I have my thoughts, but that's not the only one. So I would say the principal thought is to have a philosophy, and to let your player know what that is, and to communicate that with your player. I can't tell you the number of times I've seen coaches on the pro tour that don't have much of a playing background. The guy that directed Pete Sampras's career, certainly we saw the coaches that were out there, but he had a mentor from the time he was young to when he was, I don't know how long it lasted, but a guy named Dr. Pete Fisher, who was a doctor.
Yeah, was a doctor.
And I don't know that he had a tennis background, but he was what Pete needed in those growing years. And so can he coach others? I don't know. You wouldn't think, but he certainly helped Pete a whole lot.
Yep.
So I think there are different people for different players. And I think there are also different coaches for players at different levels. And you might find also that there's a coach that is incredible at the younger ages, but may not be as helpful on the pro tour, and vice versa. Players who have great playing credentials on the pro tour, but they might have forgotten what a young player needs to know in his early developmental years. So that's why I think it's important. I said at the beginning, it's important that if you're creating a relationship with a player, I want that player to interview me and to know as much about me to know whether it's the right fit or not. Can I work on, can I teach the forehand at an early stage? Just simple. I want them to know as much about my coaching style. And I don't like looking at a coach whose player is winning and say, that's my coach. I want to try to get with him, because it doesn't always work that way. So,
yeah, very good one. Last question. You spend all your life in tennis. Are you enjoying your journey?
Very much, and the journey continues. I consider myself a very lucky person to have been introduced to this game at a young age. Some of the feelings that I've had, I just can't describe. For example, I mentioned earlier that I started playing because a couple of Japanese players, junior players, left me a racket, and I watched them in the Orange Bowl. Fast forward 15 years later, when I'm playing on the pro tour and I go to Tokyo and I see two of them.
Oh yeah.
That to me was just sort of full circle of what this game can do. And those types of things. And even to this day, people were remembering matches that I played and reminded me. A guy walked up to me the other day in a parking lot at a club and said, I just watched your YouTube match against Borg at the Pepsi Grand Slam in 1978. So I'm either thinking, you don't have much of a life or you're a tennis junkie.
Yeah.
He said, and I just want to tell you, you gave me so much of a thrill watching that match, and you brought a lot to a lot of people in tennis. So, you hear things like that. It makes you feel good that you've done something to make the context that we've made. So, yeah, I guess you can tell from my enthusiasm that I have enjoyed the journey.
Yeah, definitely. Brian, many thanks to be in our episode of the Tennis Talk, and many thanks also for all the things that you did and you are doing for tennis. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And you keep up the good work too.
Thank you very much, Brian. And thank you also to Tennis One, GPTCA, and the Segal Intitute, who are working to create this bridge between you and the top leaders of our game to keep creating awareness and grow to our sport. Thank you very much. Until the next episode of the Tennis Talk Coaches' Voices.
I am Alberto Castellani, President of GPTCA, Global Professional Tennis Coach Association. Learn from the best ATP coaches in the world. I hope that at the end of this course you will learn a lot of things. I hope that I will see you on the circuit with your player. This is the goal.